A warm welcome to everyone participating in the CVF Virtual Summit. My name is Patrick Verkooyen. I'm the CEO of the Global Center on Adaptation, an international organization hosted by the government of the Netherlands aimed to accelerate adaptation at scale. We're also the managing partner, together with the World Resources Institute, of the Global Commission on Adaptation. It is my pleasure to moderating this panel from local to global, accelerating adaptation at all levels. We have a stellar panel with us today live. Before we go to the live panel, we would like to show you two framing video remarks. The first one is from Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General of the United Nations. He is the co-chair of the Global Commission on Adaptation and the chair of the Global Center on Adaptation. Let's look at that video. For those of you who would like to join this interactive session, I should tell it up front, please send in your questions and comments through Twitter. To do this, please use the hashtag #VirtualClimateSummit. Let's look at the video of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon.
Thank you, Dr. Verkooyen, for moderating this important panel and dialogue hosted in collaboration with the International Center for Climate Change and Development. To address your question, let me speak to the following points. Climate adaptation is everybody's business, locally, subnationally, regionally, and globally. We must all act, especially to support and protect the poor and most vulnerable, like those who live in Climate Vulnerable Forum, CVF member nations. The consequences are severe. Between 2030 and 2050, climate change is expected to cause approximately 250,000 additional deaths per year from malaria, malnutrition, diarrhea, and heat stress. For those living near the ocean, about 40% of the world's population, the situation is equally dire. Projected sea level rise is alarming, and it means these communities will be left with no choice but to move inland, away from where they call home. In our journey towards a more climate resilient future, we can all learn from one another. Multi-level action was called out in the recent IPCC report as an important approach to adaptation. We know that adaptation requires coordination, not just across boundaries, but among and between different levels of government. For example, community-based adaptation success and community experiences with the climate can inform national and global action. And we must consider how adaptation actions designed at one level can support or constrain action at another. The Global Commission on Adaptation, which I lead with Bill Gates and Kristalina Georgieva, is urgently working to catalyze adaptation action at scale and at speed to transform societies. Part of our mission is to consider the challenges and ways forward for linking local and global adaptation action. We must all work together and learn from one another, because together we can achieve more than we ever could alone. Greater resilience is achievable through the Global Commission on Adaptation and the efforts of all of us. We can accelerate adaptation and focus on innovative solutions that will ensure the well-being of humanity. Thank you.
Ban Ki-moon, these were very insightful remarks. Let's go to the next and final video of Minister van Nieuwenhuizen. Cora van Nieuwenhuizen is the Minister of Infrastructure and Water in the Netherlands. He's also the initiating commissioner of the Global Commission on Adaptation And a few days ago here in the Netherlands, she launched a national adaptation plan for the government of the Netherlands. So let's listen to her video and see what she has to say on how to accelerate climate adaptation.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to join this vital discussion, convened by the Netherlands-based Global Center on Adaptation. A discussion that will examine the challenges and ways forward for linking global and local adaptation action. As many of you know, the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte announced earlier today that the Global Center on Adaptation will act as a managing partner of the Climate Vulnerable Forum. Together we stand strong. Together we are smarter. And together we have a greater reach. Only a month ago, I launched the Global Commission on Adaptation, headed by former UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon, Microsoft founder Bill Gates, and World Bank CEO Kristalina Georgieva. I'm certain that together with this commission, we'll be able to accelerate breakthrough solutions that will catalyze swift transformations on a large scale. We must limit the devastating impact on the world's most vulnerable populations, such as those represented in the Climate Vulnerable Forum. The risks these communities face are disproportionately high. By bringing together governments, the private sector, civil society, and knowledge institutions, we can remove the obstacles that are slowing down action on adaptation. In the Netherlands, water management and adaptation are part of everyday life. A third of our country lies below sea level, and we've worked for centuries to keep the water out. Last month, the IPCC issued a stark warning. Even if we achieve the Paris climate goals, sea levels will still rise. Weather will still become more extreme, and we'll still lose whole stretches of coastline. And our ecosystems will still be disrupted. It's happening as we speak. Every country, rich and poor, must do more to combat the impact of climate change. We need to take urgent action, from local level right up to global level. We must share knowledge, plan ahead, make smart investments and embrace new technologies. Climate change affects us all. We cannot wait for long-term measures to take effect. We're in trouble now, so we must act now. Thank you.
So these were very inspiring words from Minister van Nieuwenhuizen, and it also concludes the introductory framing videos. We now would like to go to the live panelists. I think we're very proud, well, I know, we're very proud of having an all-female panel with us today. And the way we would like to run this is that we would ask each panelist to make opening remarks to frame the issue, and then allow viewers to raise their questions and comments, to which then the panelists will respond. The first panelist with us today is Pilar Bueno. Pilar is a researcher from the National Council for Scientific and Technical Research in Argentina, and importantly, she's also the co-chair of the UNFCCC Adaptation Committee. Pilar, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and I would like to share some lessons learned from the work done by the Adaptation Committee in the last year in terms of various approaches to adaptation, in particular community-based adaptation. Let me first say that the Adaptation Committee is a constituted body of the UNFCCC, and it was established in 2010 during COP16 in Cancun, and we provide technical guidance and support to the parties, and also we promote synergy and we strengthen engagement with different national, regional, and international organizations, centers, and networks. So the main topic of this debate is quite important for our work. And well, as I said, some of the results and the lessons learned that I would like to share with you, first of all, is we found that each country or local actor need to find its own optimal combination of approaches according to its circumstances. Both CBA and EBA are complementary approaches, and in real world adaptation planning and implementation is likely to utilize elements of several approaches, maximizing the advantages for particular situations and context. Also, these approaches are bottom-up, so they are decentralized methods that place high priority to community and most vulnerable voices. It's an opportunity for more participatory methods. However, to expand and to scale up adaptation to the national level, it's necessary to integrate these local activities into institutional and policy frameworks that will mainstream adaptation into national adaptation planning and implementation actions. So we found that it's very important to build this interactive relationship between bottom-up and top-down approaches between local, national, regional, and global level. Let me give you an example. For example, we need to scale up adaptation. We need to mainstream these local activities and to assist these local communities. We need to mainstream it to the national level. For example, for the access of finance, in particular public finance, but not only public finance, but also the whole mobilization of support in terms of finance, technology, and capacity building. We also found some common challenges. Let me just give you some cases. First of all is the importance of the stakeholder engagement. This is critical to engage local to national decision makers for trust and also for ownership, as well as using gender sensitivity and cultural appropriate tools for engaging women and vulnerable groups to raise their awareness and also to avoid maladaptation. Another critical issue for us is to assess the effectiveness of adaptation action, both the planning and implementation. And in these terms, I would like to mention two issues. First of all, the importance of developing M&E frameworks, and at the same time to facilitate synergies between different institutions and the coordination between different institutions that we all know that is an incredible challenge.
Thank you, Pilar, for these very wise words, particularly giving voice to the most vulnerable ones, and then just see how the local and the national and the global interact and the challenges, but also opportunities arise for us. Okay, let's move now to Edith of WANA, who is a senior program specialist from Canada's IDRC. IDRC recently launched, together with the Global Center on Adaptation, a 2020 program where 20 young leaders from across the world will be financially sponsored by IDRC to work on adaptation action. Edith, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for this opportunity. I'd like to draw on some lessons and experiences of 7 years of research work that we've done in the Global South. And this has been focusing on enabling farmers to adapt to climate change. And it's drawing on tailor-made community climate information services. So making climate information services available at the front line of the communities. The work started in Uganda in one of the very fragile climate hotspots, which is the cattle corridor. The cattle corridor covers about 40% of Uganda's land mass. And this work is now currently scaling to Uganda and Kenya. So I'd really like to share with you 3 key pillars of what it would take to accelerate adaptation action at scale based on the years of research of work that we've done at the community level. The first pillar, which is critical is putting in place viable institutional arrangements. And this really looks at how you can provide adaptation support in a very coordinated manner that allows us to break the silos in terms of ensuring coordination across government entities. And this needs to be backed up by right policy framework in place, as well as the legislative framework. And the legislative framework needs to allow collaboration across departments so that support to adaptation is provided in a sort of like whole of government approach to supporting this work. Mainstreaming is critical when you're looking at institutional arrangements and embedding the actions and support within how governments provide services. So that's the first point, and this needs to be done from the national to local level. The second pillar is looking at reliable, tailored and localized adaptation information and services. And this needs to be very tailored to the needs of the users. It needs to be cognizant of the fact that risks change over time. Adaptation options change over time, so it needs to be very dynamic. And the lessons and experiences and learning that comes from the community level needs to feed back to inform policy design, policy implementation, and review. So there needs to be a lot of interactivity and back and forth between lessons that are being learned at the community level, feeding back into policy and the policy shaping implementation. That then allows you the enabling environment to actually scale. The third pillar is sustainable financing. When it comes to providing adaptation support, there's a cost to it. For it to be sustainable, who pays for financing? The research that we did in Uganda showed that to provide integrated climate information and services to communities costs around $12 per household per year. And when we did research to look at to what extent our communities, especially when they are empowered and things become better for them, are they willing and able to pay? And we found that they are able to actually bear a third of the cost. That's the evidence that we got. So the question is, what model would work best in terms of delivering adaptation support? And we found that combining a service model and a business model. So a service model would be where you're embedding the cost within how government is currently providing support, and then supplementing that with maybe private sector investment as well as investment from the communities. That indeed it is possible to have sustainable financing. The last point that I'd like to make is the importance of fostering equitable access to women, to men, to the elderly, to those with disability and other marginalized groups within the farming community. So the issue of gender equity, social equity becomes very critical when providing these particular services. So at this point, I will stop here and maybe probably provide more details during the discussion. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you, Edith, for your remarks, particularly also your conceptual framework focused on institutions, on finance, and dynamic, localized information, all through an equity lens. Let's move to Neha Raj, Senior Researcher from the International Institute for Environment and Development. Neha, the floor is yours.
Yes, hi, I'm Neha Rai, as Patrick introduced. IID is an institution based in the UK, and we've been strongly investing in local actions, particularly in getting finance to the local people through devolved climate funds, and also making sure that we learn from actions at the local level. So effectiveness of finance and effectiveness of local actions. We all know climate impacts are increasingly undermining development progress, so local people are in the best position to know what needs to be done. And it also makes practical sense to take actions through local interventions, because we know large centralized actions take time to design, finance, and deliver, while smaller actions on the ground can be delivered more rapidly and give local governments more voices. However, we know some of you already mentioned that there are some key barriers to accelerating local adaptation actions. And the two main ones are barriers to attracting finance, and then the second is evidence and learning barrier. The attracting finance a bit is because there's a perceived risk that local finance is highly risky. There's insufficient scale to attract investors because there are high transaction costs. There's a sort of absence of dialogue and disconnect. And also there are learning barriers because a lot of emphasis of assessing adaptation actions is done at quite a high level, and little is learned from what's happening at the local level. So I'll give you a few examples where, despite these struggles, local actions are being prioritized in a lot of countries in a very effective way. For example, if you see the devolution mechanism or the devolved climate funds in Kenya, Tanzania, Mali, and Senegal, where there's a consortium of group working towards this effort. In just a couple of years, there has been 250 investments between funded by local priorities and prioritized by local communities, reaching around 1.5 million people, showing that smaller investments can be delivered through more innovative government and private aggregation models. You also see these examples of special purpose vehicles that act as aggregation agencies, which can then work as one-stop models, which sometimes work better than different agencies going out and financing local projects. For example, in Bangladesh, IDCOL is providing solar irrigation pumps and home systems as an aggregator agency, and Alternative Energy Promotion Center in Nepal is doing similar work. And then we have examples of social protection interventions that are helping communities build resilience through local actions and financing. So these are some of the ways that IID has been investing in trying to study as well as actually implement these actions on the ground. I can talk more about it, but I think we have limited time, so I can pick this up later. But thank you very much for giving this opportunity to be on a very all-women panel.
Thank you, Neha, for your very inspiring words. Also, before we go to the next speaker, for those of you who are online and responding to this panel, thank you for that. The more questions, comments, challenges you want to bring to this panel, the better it is, and we will pick that up in the next round. Let's move now to Christina Chan. Christina Chan is the Director of Climate Resilience at the World Resources Institute. She's also the co-director of the Global Commission on Adaptation and a leader in the space of adaptation action. Christina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And before I begin, I just want to thank the Global Center on Adaptation and for hosting this event with ICCCAD, and also just really appreciate being part of the CVF Virtual Summit. It's an incredible opportunity. I want to start with just saying a little bit more about sort of how I got into adaptation. And it was originally with working with some communities in southern Nepal, working with CARE and helping them reduce their risk to floods. So it was a flood risk management project. And in the span of just 15 months of that project, what we saw is that some basic awareness, capacity building really did increase their ability to adapt or cope with floods when the flood season came. What I felt at the end of that project, which was a very local project, it was working with about 15 communities in 3 districts, was the impact of that project was so tangible. You could see the difference that it was making in the lives of individuals, of households and communities, but it was such a minor blip in the broader bucket of what was needed, just using Nepal as an example. And so this piece about local to global, several of the other panelists have talked about the linkages between local action and global action. But I just want to, for me, I moved from working directly with communities because the impact, while tangible, just didn't feel at the scale that was required. And for me, that is one of the fundamental reasons we need national action, to support those efforts and empower those efforts at the local level, even more important at the global level. When I left CARE, I actually moved on then to sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, which was at the global level. And what we achieved, many of us actually on this panel achieved together in 2015 was pretty fantastic in terms of having, for example, the Paris Agreement and reflecting the fact that adaptation is a global challenge. It's something that every country needs to do, not just certain countries, but every country. It also recognized the importance of finance at the global level. For me, that the fact that we had the Paris Agreement with its global goal, recognizing that we all have recognized for quite some time that to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to achieve the temperature goal, we all need to mitigate. Every country has a responsibility to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, respective, of course, of their capacity. But what was incredible about this Paris goal was also the recognition that not only did we all need to adapt, but that the adaptation in one country does have impact in terms of adaptation in another country, as well as the importance of global cooperation and coordination. That's a key piece. As we think about some of the local challenges, the national challenges, a few of the other panelists talked about it. For example, you've got local action, and how do you lift up and scale up that local action nationally or even at scale in communities? You need national policies and frameworks. You need institutional coordination. You need to make sure also that the finance that's coming in internationally is being channeled and flowing and reaching the poorest and most vulnerable and addressing their priorities. Those are all sort of the links between local and global. But what I wanted to focus my brief remarks on is this global piece. So I talked about the Paris Agreement. That was 2015. It's been 3 years. And I think I don't want to speak for others on this panel, but this sense, especially coming a month after the IPCC report on 1.5 degrees, that we are just not doing enough. There was this groundswell of commitment. You're seeing an increasing number of commitments at the global and national level for adaptation or for mainstreaming adaptation into economic and development activities and plans. But we're not seeing the action, the commensurate action or the commensurate support. And it's one of the reasons why World Resources Institute joined with the Global Center on Adaptation to launch this new Global Commission on Adaptation. Is this keen awareness that we really need to lift, again, the profile of adaptation politically and globally to accelerate action and support so we can get the type of action and support at the national and local level. This new Global Commission on Adaptation is going to try to leverage and the resources out there, the existing initiatives, coalitions, working with, for example, the Adaptation Committee within the UNFCCC, really trying to find ways to overcome the barriers that we are seeing that have been there all along. But there was a moment, at least that I felt with the Paris Agreement, that we'd really broke through something. And now we've got to pick up that momentum again. And this Global Commission on Adaptation will be delivering a flagship report in 2019 at the UNSG Summit. It will also deliver new commitments and new initiatives through our action tracks, also to be delivered at the UNSG Summit in 2019. But there will also be a big year in 2020, what we're calling the Commission's Year of Action, where we will be using the power, the voice, the influence of our 17 convening countries and our 28 commissioners led by Ban Ki-moon, Bill Gates and Kristalina Georgieva to really help the world implement those recommendations, as well as take forward the new commitments and implement those commitments and announcements coming out of 2019 through 2020 and beyond. So that's a little bit about the Commission and what I wanted to talk about in terms of what is the role of the global community to really address those issues that other panelists had spoken about. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, also sharing your experience in Nepal at sort of the local level, and then how you moved up to the global, and then from there back to the local action. I think that's sort of the thrust also for our panel today. So let us check whether Annette Condola is with us today. There were some technical issues. Annette, are you with us? Annette is working for CARE, the program manager for the resilience program. Has, I think, a lot to offer for the panel, but let's see whether the technology is with us on this particular case. Annette? Maybe not yet. So hopefully Annette will join us at a later stage. We still have 20 minutes left, so we're working on that. Actually, I would like to pick up, and many of the comments online are on this issue of scalability, scale and speed of action. We've heard throughout the panelists, from all panelists, the need for local action and how to link it up to the national level and to the global level. But what I would like to, I want to go back to the panelists and say, okay, what is your top 3 needs for coordinated local, national, global responses? So what are the 1, 2, 3 recommendations you have to accelerate action at scale and speed, and then focus your remarks on the local, national, global interface? Let's go back to Pilar. What's your formula of success?
Well, thank you, Patrick, for this question, and also I wanted to pick up and to follow up some of the remarks of Christina. I wonder all the time from my research activity, as well as in the AC, how this Paris architecture can cross this global level that sometimes seems to be very far from local actors and communities, how this framework can illuminate all the other levels that we are talking about, and as I said, in particular, the most vulnerable. So how we can provide together meaning, a different scale meaning to words such as ambition, progression, support, cooperation. These are words that are very meaningful in terms of the UNFCCC world, but what is the meaning for local action? And I think the real combination between, for example, these collective and national contributions and initiatives that Paris Agreement provides, it's very important, because as Christina mentioned, we have in the Paris Agreement the opportunity of collective action through GTA, the Global Goal of Adaptation, as well as the GSP. But at the same time, we need to continue improving the national efforts in terms of MDCs. So, of course, COP24, it's a great and very important opportunity that will take place in Katowice very soon. It's a great opportunity for everyone, in particular at the national level, but not only to improve their actions, to be more ambitious, more to avoid backsliding, but at the same time, how we can, for example, from the Adaptation Committee, we are working with different actors at different levels in order to support the work done, and picking the comment on adaptation finance that is coming from different speakers also. We are working a lot with institutional arrangements and operating entities of the UNFCCC in order to improve and to strengthen and to provide guidance in the way that we can, in considering the Standing Committee of Finance and TCF and Adaptation Fund role, and I will make a particular remark on the Adaptation Fund role as a good example of how to improve this relationship between the local level and the global level, because this is a very small fund, and but this very small scale fund provides an incredible opportunities for access for vulnerable communities and groups. So I think this fund is a good example of how we can, at the global level, we can improve also the relationship with the local level and the most vulnerable communities. So just to give an example, Patrick, of work that we are already delivering and how we can improve the access of different countries and the relationship and the coordination between local actors and national actors for accessing the operating entities of the financial architecture, considering the UNFCCC.
Excellent. So before we go to the other panelists to address this question on how to accelerate action at scale and speed, it seems that Annette is with us now. The technical issue is resolved. Annette Condola, as I said, project manager for CARE International. Annette, why don't you share your framing remarks first on the coherence between local, national, and global interaction through the lens of CARE?
Patrick, I work for CARE International in Uganda. I manage the Partners for Resilience program. Our experience as CARE in climate adaptation, mitigation, and policy engagement point to the issue of connecting access to information from the local level, national level, and global level. So we need to identify the workable mechanisms to facilitate the feedback. But also our experience is to see that the adaptation takes into context, the local into the context of the local communities, and particularly looking at the women and the youth. Largely giving an example of our projects in Uganda, the youth form the big part of the population, and what we learn is we need to target them to ensure that these actions are bought into. The challenge we have at the moment is the coherence and the coordination of stakeholders within country, the region. For instance, adaptation actions are not limited to single sectors, ministries and agencies, but equally when you come at the regional level, for instance, you have the East African community, you have the inter-development agencies, you have African Union, and going up. So to what extent do we get that coherence and coordination of the stakeholders into adaptation? Also want to point out the issue of monitoring adaptation actions. At the end, the Partners for Resilience are thinking of adaptation financing, tracking the adaptation finances. I think that's very critical. We may be investing, the global community is investing in adaptation and governments are investing, but to what extent do we get to understand the effectiveness of the funding, and to what extent is it contributing to gender transformation? My other point is about technology. We talk about adaptation action, but we need to think about the technology that is affordable and gender transformative. And in a case, looking forward, the investments also, we need to continue to look at investing in innovation that are more transformative.
Thank you, Annette, for these very wise and inspiring words. Let's go back to our interactive exchange with the panelists. Again, it's on the coherence between local, national, and global interaction, and how to, let's say, accelerate at scale and speed. Edith, you shared your framework of success: institutions, information, sustainable finance. There are questions online from several viewers. What's the role of the private sector in this? And can you give a couple of examples, or at least one example, of how the private sector could come best on board? Edith?
Okay, thank you, Patrick. I'd like to address that by giving a specific example of the work that we are doing in Uganda, where we are looking at how to localize climate information and services using mobile platform, ICT platform, as well as traditional ways in which communities receive information, which is through radio. So it's sort of like an integrated approach using multiple channels to provide information and working in a multi-stakeholder perspective. Two of the private sector entities that we are working with is the mobile operator, who are coming in to provide a mobile platform where weather focus as well as agricultural advisory can be provided. And the second is community radio stations, which are actually private entities. And earlier on, I had mentioned the issue of cost. How do you sustain provision of adaptation information in a way that can surpass, can really address the issues that they have without being dependent on necessarily external funding? So some of the models that we've been discussing with the mobile operator is because they make revenue out of providing these services. To what extent can they partner in the service to business model that we talked about earlier to actually share some of the revenue to continue to provide this information? So looking at a revenue sharing model with the private sector to provide these services. As well, we have seen that the community radio stations are also willing to actually chip in because they make money through advertising by running some of these programs where they're providing climate information services. So it's possible to bring the private sector on board. We've been doing this for the last 6 to 7 years, and we are now looking at how then do we share the cost of delivering this service in a sustainable way. And the private sector is very keen to say, yes, indeed, we've seen it working. It does make a difference. We are making money out of this. How can we then share the revenue to continue to provide these services? So I'd like to give that as a concrete example. And Patrick, if you allow me, very quickly, I want to address the first question that you raised in terms of how do we ensure coordination and coherence in terms of responses across different levels. I think I want to mention two things that are important. When it comes to getting different departments to coordinate in providing adaptation support, it needs to be backed up by law. A number of these institutions seem to have independent mandates when it comes to coordinating their work, because climate change covers multiple sectors. If you have a legislative framework that allows them by law to coordinate, that makes it much easier for coordination. The second point is about budgeting, because while they might want to work together, they may not have the budget to really coordinate and work together. So what I've seen Uganda do as a requirement is in the budgeting process, each department is now required to incorporate, and I think it's by policy, they are drafting their law, so I don't think it has been embedded in law yet. They're required to budget for climate so that when it comes to coordination, they actually have the budget to have a coordinated support in reaching vulnerable communities. So I just wanted to share some of those practical things that are working and are in place. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Edith. And I think for all panelists, the more, let's say, operational we can be in our remarks, in giving concrete examples and suggestions, I think the more informative it is. Let's go to Neha. Neha, you addressed the key barriers being, well, amongst others, finance and learning. There are questions also from viewers about, particularly about the learning side, from the local action to global and from global back to the local action. What are sort of the 3 or 2 key recommendations how we can, let's say, improve on the learning cycle?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think that's a very important question, particularly when in the current COP we will be discussing ways to develop or MPGs, or the modalities and procedures for the enhanced transparency framework for adaptation. And we're all talking a lot at the global level, global reporting, stocktake, adaptation goal. But where does the local element fit in, or local learning or effectiveness of local actions feed in to the system? I think that's the main question. We know that there'll be more robust learning if we are evaluating things at the local level, and then using these scattered mechanisms to inform national planning as well as to assess the adaptation goal. So I would say, I think the 3 main things to focus on is making sure we build on local M&E systems and learn from those. Countries have been investing in local M&E systems quite strongly over the years, but we often see them as ways to assess action at the local level, but not inform planning. For example, if you see Kenya's case, Kenya has a national MRV and an M&E system, which has been, progressing, but is still not that actively progressing. But the subnational M&E systems is quite strong in terms of integrating how climate risks are impacting actions, and learning from those existing subnational M&E processes and using that for national planning as well as for reporting could be quite useful. Also making sure that we are not looking at climate action learning as siloed from development M&E. So integrating local M&E systems and national M&E systems within the development planning realms by using existing systems would be quite useful way of learning from the local level, which without adding additional layers and burden to the countries. I think those are the 2 main points which I would like to highlight so far. Yeah.
Thank you, Neha. Let's go to Christina. Christina, you're on behalf of WRI, together with the Global Center, you're leading the Global Commission on Adaptation. You referenced it in your opening remarks, this 2-year time frame. A couple of questions. What is success for the Global Commission? 1. 2, how can we ensure that the local voices will be heard and will be picked up through the Global Commission? And 3, how can we truly accelerate action, the Global Commission? So on the Global Commission, there's a lot of momentum behind it, but we need to make sure that this is truly an inclusive process. What are your views on this?
Thank you, Patrick. So 3 big questions. I'll start with the first. What is success for the Global Commission? And I would say the ultimate marker of success is whether we've been able to mobilize and deepen the movement, the global movement on adaptation, with a particular focus. As I hear my panelists speak about all the important ways to scale, to replicate, to learn, what strikes me is that even if we have political will, even if we have laws and policy frameworks and flexible budgetary systems, both nationally and financing internationally, the ability to know and have the capacity to translate climate information into actions that is actually effective. The part of the success of the commission will be to accelerate adaptation action, but with the evidence of what is actually working. Why is it working? How is it working? Is it leading our adaptation actions that we're taking today, that we're seeking to accelerate and scale up? Are they leading to actual avoided losses? Are they leading to new opportunities? One of our commissioners, Strive Masiyiwa, talked about the importance of Africa, of making adaptation work for youth to create new job opportunities, which is just a key point of success for this commission, is if we can understand and accelerate action that opens up new opportunities, as well as demonstrates the co-benefits that if we do better adaptation, that will result in better development, better economic activity, recognizing that adaptation is a burden, particularly for the poorest and most vulnerable who are not responsible for the impact. Local voices are absolutely, we will not be successful if we are not truly a global movement. And that includes both the voices of the Bill Gates of the world, all the way down to the farmer or the fisherman in a given country. In terms of that acceleration, part of it is to mobilize the voices. We've got an incredible microphone that we have right now with our commissioners and conveners. And if we can demonstrate the evidence of what is working, why it's working, to help scale that up, utilizing and leveraging that network of commissioners and conveners and our partners, local partners, regional partners, I think that will help us get to success. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Christina. We know that time is almost up, but there are some very pressing questions coming our way from our listeners. One of that is around the point which you just mentioned, Christina, and other panelists mentioned as well, is about giving voice to the most vulnerable, sometimes marginalized people. Annette, if you're still with us, what's your measurement of success, and what's the key intervention which is needed to give the most vulnerable a voice in not only planning, but also in action itself? And that's final words to you, and then we wrap it up.
Thank you, Patrick. What works is ensuring that we have multiple stakeholder platforms. Here, we are working with the Global Adaptation Platform to document what works using our Partners for Resilience experience. And we have as demonstration of what works is the partnership of the private sector, the government, and the communities. I just looked at the chat box. There is a question of the best practice by the private sector. We have Cadwell that has been growing indigenous tree species from a business case. And also Guru Nanak protecting the Shiana together with the communities using a business case. And therefore, the marginalized communities can be at the center if we have incentives that are well defined. And in Uganda, using the PFR program, we are working on those multi-stakeholder platforms, and particularly putting the women and the youth at the center. But above all, demonstrating the technology that is cheap.
Thank you. Thank you, Annette, for this. I think the cross-cutting theme in what I hear from the panel is about interconnectivity, right? It needs local voice, local action, all the way to national interventions, global interventions. We need institutions, we need information, we need finance, and we need equity. So I think going forward, it's absolutely vital that we design the systems which basically amplify and encourage this interaction between the different levels. In the next 2 years, as the Global Center on Adaptation, together with WRI, we are supporting the Global Commission on Adaptation. We have a very important milestone, as Christina already mentioned, at the UNSC Summit next year, and then 2 years from now at an Adaptation Action Summit hosted by the government of the Netherlands. We want to make sure that we do this together with you, with the world at all levels, get all input, all best practices. At the end of the day, success is scale and speed of action on the ground. We can be grandiose in changing the discourse at the global level. It has to translate to the ground level. So I think this was a very powerful dialogue. We've learned a lot from our panelists, and I'm very grateful for those online for sharing your remarks and comments. Please continue to raise your voice, reach out to panelists, reach out to us, so we can continue the conversation also after this important panel. Thank you all very much indeed. There are very important panels coming up throughout the day, and I wish you all the best. Thank you very much.